Hello and welcome to India's World. Long-standing tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran took a turn for the worse with the kingdom's execution of a Shiite cleric, Sheikh Nimr Bakir al-Nimr, along with 46 others on January 2nd. The 47 executed included 45 Saudis, 1 Egyptian and a man from Chad. The 4 Shiites amongst those executed, including Sheikh Nimr, were convicted of involvement in shootings and petrol bomb attacks that killed several policemen during anti-government protests between 2011 and 13. The others were Sunni Muslims alleged to be al-Qaeda terrorists. Sheikh Nimr was a prominent critic of the Saudi royal family. He had called for the overthrow of the ruling clan and was the spiritual leader of the Shiite minority in Saudi Arabia. The news of the executions was greeted with anger in Shia-majority Iran, where protesters attacked the Saudi embassy in Tehran and its mission in Mashhad. In response, Saudi authorities announced they were cutting off diplomatic ties with Iran. Some countries in the region and beyond have followed the Saudi lead in severing or downgrading ties with Iran. The Iranian embassy in Sana'a in Yemen was bombed on January 7th, and Tehran accused Riyadh of engineering the attack. To understand the standoff between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is political and rooted in the sectarian divisions within Islam, and the impact of this on an already restive region, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a formidable diplomat. He's been India's foreign secretary and has been India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France and Russia. We have Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravarthy. He's been India's ambassador to the Philippines, Thailand and High Commissioner to Bangladesh. He has also served in Indian missions in London, Cairo, Tel Aviv and Jeddah. And we have with us my old friend, Dr. Waiel Awwad, an eminent journalist. He's the chief of bureau of SANA, Syrian Arab News Agency, and knows the Middle East better than most journalists, having worked for several media institutions and media houses there, ranging from radio to print to television. So I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Chakravarthy, let me begin with you. Sheikh Nimr's death sentence had been pending since the time of King Abdullah. So at a time when the world thought that Nimr would be spared, that he would not be killed, why was he suddenly executed, and that too with other Sunni terrorists? Was it a message, a special message that the new regime of King Salman was sending to the Shias of his own country and to the world at large?
Well, in a sense, yes, because as you know, after the new regime came to power, there has been a swing in Saudi foreign policy. Earlier, it was understated and deals were made under the radar. But today, you have the Saudis aggressively, for example, pursuing the bombing campaign in Yemen, and then, of course, the executions that have happened. They have a restive Shia minority in the eastern province, which by the way, has all the oil, Saudi oil. And the third factor, and I think that is probably the most important factor, is this growing rivalry with Iran. And the fact that the American compact, which made this kind of an alliance between Saudi Arabia and America, seems to be fraying, at least in Saudi eyes. Okay. And then that is, I think, one of the primary reasons why this aggressive, outreach by the Saudis.
Sibal, the Saudis say that Sheikh Nimr was a Saudi citizen. He was tried for sedition and he was punished under Saudi law. Why should his execution lead to deterioration of ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran?
Well, for several reasons. One, of course, you have to see it in the background of the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which has become much more acute in recent years. Number two, Sheikh Nimr has lived in Iran for a long time, and therefore he has had close connections, especially with the Khamenei's, with President Khamenei, which is why the present leader of Iran spoke very strongly against this execution. The Saudis, most analysts say, are getting into deeper problems internally. The Saudi royal family is losing ground. The economic problems are now staring in the face of Saudi Arabia. So they are, people say, deliberately provoking the sectarian divide for a couple of reasons. One, to try and see if somehow the US-Iranian deal, even at this late stage, can be how should I say, not sabotaged, but prevented from being implemented without problems. And number two, it is to mobilize the Arab world externally and domestically the Sunni Arabs behind the royal family. And the best way to do is to sharpen the divide on a sectarian basis with Iran as part of this mobilization of internal support. And lastly, and I'll end with that, I think many people believe there is a hand of the US neocons who are very close to Saudi Arabia and who are against this deal with Iran in encouraging Saudi Arabia in this direction.
Dr. Awwad, we'll talk about the external aspects of these executions in a moment. But what will be the impact of Sheikh Nimr's execution on the Shia minority in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia? After this execution, are they going to become less restive? Are they going to stop fighting for equality with the Sunni majority? Will they be frightened into submission?
No, I think it's already started. The eruptions was taking place immediately, even before his killing. There was lots of demonstration, which was suppressed by the Saudi regime because the Saudi defense minister and the home minister said it openly that let the tank roll on their bodies. So they were very much furiously fought any kind of uprising against the king. And that is why he was executed. Not because of his sectarian doctrine. He never had an anti-Sunni feeling. He simply doesn't believe in King Salman to be the king. He wanted the political reforms. He wanted to see more of a socio-economic uprising, uplifting of the Qutayf and the eastern part where the majority of the oil reservoir of Saudi Arabia is there. But it is the most deprived people in that part of the Saudi Arabia where they are unable to survive. So this is the reason. So his killing is already seen, lots of demonstration. But I think whatever the co-panelists have said, I fully agree with them on this line because it shows that the Saudis are desperate. They are in a turmoil themselves, that the government is falling down, the monarchy is already being divided house, the young generation are not happy with them. They have tried to make a sectarian kind of Sunni alliance. They brought an anti-terrorism-led coalition, which is they failed, many countries refused. So they had also this attack on Yemen, they had the attack on Bahrain, supporting the Bahrain, and then they have already encouraged Saddam Hussein to go for a war. So now it is the Saudi turn to make sure that this sectarian line can be utilized the most.
Pinak, so has Nimr's death then become the centerpiece of a brewing regional crisis?
Well, it certainly triggered off. The crisis was already there. I mean, it all began with the nuclear deal, really. And as Ambassador Sibal has just said, that there may be unhappy people in the US who are trying to encourage the Saudi to perhaps scuttle this deal or whatever, or to postpone it or to prevent it or things like that. Because this is something the Saudis have been unable to accept.
Okay.
So that is primarily the reason. I think it's not so much sectarian. I think you have to look at the regional rivalry and the power politics behind.
Okay, we're going to discuss that in a bit. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a while. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the increased tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran and its implications for the region. Dr. Awwad, everybody's condemned the executions there. The US State Department has condemned it. EU foreign policy chief has condemned it, and they've warned Saudi Arabia about increasing sectarian tensions at a time when you actually need to reduce them. And they've said they must respect human rights. What impact do these carefully worded statements, even from their allies, have on Saudi Arabia?
Well, everybody in the US and the West knew that the killing of al-Nimr will lead to a kind of a sectarian and volatile region. That's why they were condemning it. The human rights group also condemned it because this is a very politically motivated and a provocative measure by the government.
What impact does it have? What impact does it have on Saudi Arabia? Does it make a difference to them?
Saudi Arabia, they doesn't make difference because they are carrying with the policy. They surpass IS actually. They have the one they are competing with IS who can cut more heads, and they have cut more heads than IS. So I think that's a very competitive measure they are doing with the rest of the world.
We'll leave it at that. Ambassador Sibal, now that Saudi Arabia has cut off diplomatic ties with Iran, will the Saudis be happy that in their support some others like Bahrain have cut off ties, the United Arab Emirates has downgraded ties? One could understand this, but why have Somalia, Sudan and Djibouti also cut diplomatic ties with Iran?
Well, I don't think cutting off ties by Sudan or Djibouti is important. I think that UAE took the decision to downgrade relations and Kuwait took the decision. These are important decisions because the ties between Kuwait and Iran are very close. The commercial tie, economic ties between UAE and Iran are very close. But Jordan, Egypt, and others have been careful in this regard. So I don't think that the fact that they've been able to muster countries around them to downgrade or cut off diplomatic relations is going to be very helpful. It will only sharpen the rivalries in the region and make it even more difficult for Saudi Arabia to actually join any peace process with regard to Syria, for instance, because Iran will now obviously step up its support to the Syrian regime even more than before and be unwilling to allow Saudi Arabia to use the Sunni countries to push out the Assad regime, etc., etc. So I don't think this is very helpful what they have done.
Okay. Pinak, how will this crisis impact the ongoing conflict in Yemen, where Iran and Saudi Arabia are on two opposing sides? And why did Riyadh call off the ceasefire in the middle of this crisis with Iran and started intensive bombing of Yemen?
You see, the Saudi objective in Yemen is to sort of reinstate the old regime that they want. And clearly the Houthis and others are unwilling to accept that kind of an arrangement. The UN intervention is also not going very far because the bombings are creating more and more bitterness. You know, bombing hospitals, bombing various things. And incidentally, the Iranian embassy that was hit by splinters, it was not directly hit by a missile, but I think a neighboring building was hit. So these are exacerbating the situation to such an extent that I don't see the political solution going anywhere in Yemen at the moment. And why the Saudis are keeping this, the pot boiling? I think to an extent they are, flexing their muscles. And I think they're trying to see whether they can regain some kind of leadership role in the region. But I don't think they are succeeding beyond a point. I mean, okay, some of the Gulf states have taken steps to show their support. But I don't think they're, and it's not good for the so-called Islamic Ummah because it is going to divide them even further.
Absolutely. Dr. Awwad, let's talk about your country, Syria. Ambassador Sibal said that it will not have a good impact on attempts to resolve the Syrian crisis. Now, can the conflict in Syria be resolved if Iran and Saudi Arabia are not talking to each other?
Well, listen, there is a dominance in the region. The Saudi wanted to have a dominant role. Iran emerged suddenly after the nuclear deal with the US. So they are competing among each other. So the Saudi feel
But they were involved in Syria even before the nuclear deal.
No, but they were different support, different side. So the supporting of different. But when the American and the Russians sat across the table and decided to find a reconciliation and a political solution, then they came in terms with the American. But the killing of Zahran al-Lush and 17 of the leaders of the Al-Qaeda and the Syrian terrorist militia groups inside the Ghouta, before the killing, the execution, people seeing this act as a revenge of killing their own people inside, those who wanted to sit across the table. I think there is a lots of pressure on the Saudis to come in terms for the Syrian solution, and that's why they said, we are not going for a war with Iran. The point here is very important, and I wanted to tell you now because we will have visionary in the future, you will come to know about it. It is not Iran and Saudi Arabia. Trust me on this. It is Iraq, it is Turkey, it is Egypt, it is Saudi Arabia. Iran is doing cleverly. They are internally strong. They are doing politically dominance playing in the region. The game plan for Saudi is to drag Turkey and Egypt against each other. Watch it and see what will happen there. Okay. Syria is out of the picture because Syria was to be paid that once we finish Yemen, you can finish Syria. First finish Syria, then Yemen. That was the deal.
Okay. But let me ask you, still on Syria. The Syrian peace talks are scheduled for January 25th. Now, with Iran and Saudi Arabia at loggerheads like this, what are the prospects of those peace talks?
I think the peace talks are going to be very difficult because if they succeed, it will be a great feather in the cap of Russian diplomacy because it would have been Russian intervention that provided the necessary diplomatic political momentum to reach a peaceful solution. And this will make a lot of people unhappy. US neocons would in any case be very unhappy, but even Turkey would be exceedingly unhappy. Saudi Arabia will be unhappy. So while the talks can go on and hopefully some kind of a ceasefire can take place and some kind of lowering of tensions, I think there are lots of devils in the details, and the peace process is going to be very difficult.
Pinak, how will the current crisis affect the Saudi attempt to forge a regional alliance against the Islamic State, which controls swaths of Iraq and Syria, considering that there is a Shia government in Iraq and they're also upset with the execution of Sheikh Nimr?
Well, it's funny that we are expecting Saudi Arabia actually to forge a coalition against ISIS, which is part of their creation actually.
Exactly. But they are trying to form a
But they
coalition.
are trying to form a coalition. I think it's a very half-hearted attempt that they are doing. I don't think they are really interested in forming a coalition because they have set their hearts on removing Assad. Now, if ISIS is allowed to be decimated, then I think one of the most powerful opposing forces you are removing. Why should Saudi Arabia want that? So I think while there is an international feeling and coalition that ISIS needs to be tackled, Saudi Arabia's heart is not in it. And except to the extent that they fear the ISIS, because ISIS has become very anti-Saudi for that matter. So unless Saudi Arabia itself is actually threatened by the ISIS, I don't think they are going to actually go wholeheartedly against the ISIS.
So it's just a pretense.
Well, it's a kind of joining the coalition because the international mood is such, because of terrorism and the kind of barbarity that we have seen from the IS.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the rising tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Dr. Awwad, earlier we discussed how Saudis don't want the nuclear deal to be implemented. It's expected to be implemented this month. Now, can sectarianism be used the way they are using to prevent the nuclear deal by the end of this month?
I don't think so. They cannot, because this is a deal between the superpowers, and people, allies and partners will fall on line, especially regional partners. Like Saudi Arabia doesn't have the potential of putting its own pressure except for the money they are using, so they're unable to execute. But Iran as a country, a regional power, can only compete with Turkey, with Egypt. So Saudi Arabia can be the proxy between the two. What my point is here, because if we look at the objective of Saudi Arabia, the wisdom in Saudi Arabia monarchy has gone. We are having people in power now who has nothing that isn't visionary. They don't have the visionary of the future of stability in the Muslim countries, especially in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is subjected into division, and the chances of dividing Saudi Arabia is becoming more prominent with such kind of monarchy in power. That is why the danger is lying here. I think that's the more important part.
Sibal, so do you agree with him that the Saudis are really worried about their marginalization in the region? Because on the one hand, Iran's sphere of influence is increasing. You have a Shiite government in Iraq. On the other hand, Iran, Russia, they are together in trying to protect the Assad regime, and they are the ones who are sort of taking the initiative for peace. So that leaves Saudi Arabia nowhere.
Well, another way to look at it would be to actually focus on the internal situation in Saudi Arabia and the fact that the monarchy is in trouble.
Yeah.
And what they are trying to do is to convert the question of their personal power into a national issue. So it's not as if necessarily the Saudi policies are being guided by Saudi Arabia's national interest. It's being guided essentially by the need to preserve the power and position of the Saudi monarchy, which would then explain everything that they are doing.
But how is their power maintained by in this manner? When you actually you've lost control over Iraq, you have no influence there, and you're against very powerful people.
Which is why
in Syria.
the answer to this deteriorating position would be to try and mobilize the Sunni countries behind them, the Sunni masses behind them, as the Saudi Arabia has a particular position in the Sunni world. So they are in fact playing with the sectarian card in order to strengthen their domestic position in Saudi Arabia. So if you analyze everything that is happening from the viewpoint of the fact that the Saudi royal family is feeling beleaguered, then I think lots of things begin to fall into place.
Pinak, you wanted to say something?
Well, I wanted to say that the first priority of the Saudi sort of establishment or the government is to preserve the rule of the Saudi family, the Saud family. And it is clear that they are under domestic pressure. Why would they undertake all these things at a time when the oil revenues are going down? Because this is a lot of expenditure. For example, the civil war in Yemen and the bombing campaign is consuming enormous amounts of money. And the new regime in Saudi Arabia is already talking about increasing taxes, etc. Now, don't forget, the Saudi Arabian people have a compact with the royal family, apart from the compact with the Wahhabi clergy and things like that. That money, they will get a lot of money, a share of the revenue, etc., etc. Now, if that compact breaks down, you will certainly have internal dissent. And then you will find, and the royal family itself is divided, because many veterans in the royal family do not like this kind of aggressive posturing and muscular policy that this new regime is.
Okay, you wanted to say
something? Very briefly, you know, all this largesse that the Saudi royal family distributed to the Saudi public after the Arab Spring in order to make sure that that did not infect. They have had to withdraw it because of the economic problems that Saudi Arabia is facing. So this is just to reinforce my point, which I made earlier, that look at what's happening inside Saudi Arabia, and then you will find an answer to many of the things that they are doing.
Okay. Dr. Awwad, do you think that the worsening ties between Tehran and Riyadh offer an opportunity to Jerusalem to increase its influence in the region? Could it lead to greater cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia, because their interests seem to run in parallel in the region?
That's what the news is giving, that the Saudis are willing to give their airspace to attack Iran. But I don't think in the long run, even Iran and Israel fighting going to happen. What worries Israel is not the nuclear weapon of. What worries Israel is the missile technology and the ballistic missile of Tehran that can hit them anytime they wanted to attack. So this is out of the picture. What I think is here is more important for me as an Arab, as a belonging to this part of the world, that we should save the Arab Peninsula from Al-Saud. Otherwise, the Arab Peninsula is heading for division, and there will be more division in the Arab world. While I still feel that Iran might be having an ambition to have some kind of dominance in the region, but that does not give us the leverage, because I don't know in contemporary history that Iran have anywhere felt that they can conquer any part of the world as long as the US behind. But what worries is the Saudi monarchy is in trouble, and that lacking of the visionary within the monarchy is leading us to more chaos in the region.
Pinak, quickly, the same question. Do you think that there will be greater cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia on issues of common interest now?
There is already latent cooperation between the two, insofar as Iran is concerned. But I doubt if its war is going to break out. In fact, the recent statement coming out of Riyadh is that, this is not leading to war. They've tried to pour some oil on these troubled waters, because they're also, I think, beginning to realize that the kind of genie that they have let out of the bottle can come back and bite them.
My last question now to you, Ambassador Sibal. If the Saudis and the Iranians do not stop meddling in the affairs of the region, and neither is going to stop supporting their proxies in different countries, whether it is Yemen, Syria or Lebanon, how can their relationship ever improve, and how will this region ever stabilize?
Well, the way I look at it, I don't think he would correct me, he would know much more. I don't think that Iran's support for Assad in Syria or for Hezbollah has any particular Saudi angle. It has an Iranian angle, certainly, and a US angle.
I didn't say that. I said both are meddling in the affairs of other countries.
No, what I meant is that Saudi is very openly challenging Iran and raising these concerns about Iran becoming a dominant power in the region. The Iranians have never taken this line. So it is more the Saudi which is challenging Iran rather than the reverse. Iran actually feels that the Saudi Arabia is in trouble, the Saudi monarchy is in trouble, that all these policies are being pursued in order to preserve the power of the Saudi royal family. So the problem is not between Iran and Saudi Arabia, problem is between Iran and the Saudi royal family.
Okay.
So if you look at it from that way, I think Saudi Arabia is on a losing ground.
All right. So we've run out of time, so I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this a brilliant discussion, I would say, because I learned a lot from you. So, Dr. Waiel Awwad, Ambassador Pinak, Ranjan, Chakravarthy, Ambassador Kanwal, Sibal, thank you for coming to our studios and participating in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.